Okay, so let's take a look at the brain. So our brain is composed of about 100 billion multipolar neurons, so probably interneurons there. So the first part we're going to talk about is the cerebrum. So that's this part here. Our cerebrum contains nerve centers associated with sensory and motor functions. It also provides our higher mental functions. Where you reside is in your cerebrum. All right, so let's look at it in general. Now, all of this is cerebrum here. It is the largest part of our brain by far. There are two cerebral hemispheres. We have a left side, we have a right side there. All right, and those two hemispheres are only connected by the corpus callosum. So if I go to this next picture, there's a sagittal section. There's the corpus callosum. So this right here is not connected. So this right side of the brain that we're seeing is not connected to the left brain of the cerebrum, except only through that corpus callosum. All right? So the corpus callosum is a bridge that connects the cerebral hemispheres. Now, when we look at the cerebrum, we're going to see, and you can see it pretty well in this picture, you're going to see these grooves and these ridges. So those grooves are called sulci, and those ridges are called gyri. All right? And so this large groove down the middle there is known as a fissure. All right? So if we look at this next picture here, I'm going to talk about why we have all those ridges and grooves here in a second. So when we look at the parts of the cerebrum, we can see this here. So one part is the cerebral cortex, and the cortex is always the outer layer, right? So we can see that outer layer there, all right? And that's the cerebral cortex, and this is made of gray matter. And if you remember, gray matter is where we do integration, all right? And then the cerebral medulla is the inner portion, and this is primarily white matter. And in white matter is where we do a lot of conduction. We're sending impulses. So the reason that we have all these grooves and ridges in our cerebrum is it adds surface area. And as you look on here, you're seeing what is on the surface area of our brain. Well, what's on the surface area of our brain is gray matter. All right? And so if we have more surface area by having all these grooves, then we can have more integration occurring, essentially thought processes occurring, decision-making parts of our brain occurring. All right? So that's why our brain has so many grooves in it and ridges, is to increase surface area so we have more gray matter, so we have more decision-making parts of our brain. Okay? Now, back into the cerebral medulla. There are different kinds of fibers that are found in the cerebral medulla. So one are called association fibers. And these are to connect areas of the cerebral cortex within the same hemisphere. And these are shown in these pink lines, and those are the association fibers. Next are commissural fibers. So these are connect the cerebral hemisphere, connects one cerebral hemisphere to another. All right? So these are going to run through the corpus callosum. So right there is the corpus callosum. These blue lines are indicating those commissural fibers. Next are projection fibers. These are between the cerebrum and other parts of the brain and the spinal cord. And these are shown with these black lines. So those are the projection fibers there. All right, let's take a look at lobes. And this is a colorized version of our cerebrum there for these different lobes and what they do. So the first is the frontal lobe. So all this in purple and yellow, all that there is the frontal lobe. So this controls our voluntary skeletal muscles, also controls motivation and aggression. It also has in here our sense of smell and also helps regulate our mood. This is also, especially in our prefrontal cortex, is where we have our intellectual processes. So you, as an individual, are made up of what's in your cerebrum. That's who you are. But if there's any one part that's more you, that's up here in our frontal lobe and even more so in our prefrontal lobe. Okay? So, but you are an emergent property of all of these things going on in that cerebrum. So next is the parietal lobe, shown here in green. So our parietal lobe is a major center for reception and evaluation of most sensory information. This does not include smell, hearing, or sight. So you talk about touch, pressure, pain, stuff like that. That's determined in our parietal lobe. Next is the temporal lobe. So here's our temporal lobe. So our temporal lobe evaluates input for smell and hearing, and also plays a vital role in memory. We also get out of this abstract thought, judgment occurs out there. Lastly is the occipital lobe, and the occipital lobe functions in the reception and integration of visual input. So this is the visual cortex, as you can see there. Okay, so below the cerebrum is this guy here, and that's the cerebellum. So if we go to this picture here, they're showing the cerebellum. So this is a sagittal section, this is the whole thing. Now, cerebrum means brain, and cerebellum literally means little brain. All right, so the cerebellum, like the cerebrum, has two hemispheres to it. But the cerebellum, the cerebellum is primarily white matter in that. So when you cut into it, you can see all this white matter moving around. That structure kind of looks like a tree. They call this the arbor vitae, which means tree of life. So the functions of our cerebellum. One, it controls muscle coordination. So in that, it's going to work with the frontal lobe. It also maintains our posture and muscle tone. So muscle tone, we're going to find out, is a partial contraction of our muscles. So things that keep me upright right now, that's muscle tone. It's partial contraction of the muscles that you use to maintain your posture. It's also the timekeeping center of our brain, so we can know exactly, try to figure out how much time has passed without looking at a clock. It also helps in planning and scheduling tasks, so that's what the timekeeping comes into role there. It also helps control our balance and also our eye movements. All right, so let's move on to the next thing, and that is the diencephalon, which is kind of in the middle there. So this area right here is our diencephalon. So this encloses the third ventricle. So the third ventricle is a cavity. So if I take my two hands and I put them together, there's a cavity between my two hands. That would be the third ventricle. The walls of the third ventricle is what the diencephalon is. All right. So let's see. Yeah, let's look at this picture here. So right there in that large area is the thalamus. So the thalamus is a central relay station for sensory impulses. All right, so it's going to channel impulses to appropriate regions of our cerebral cortex. So all our sensory information is going to go through that thalamus and then go to the appropriate places of our cerebral cortex that it needs to go to. It's also going to influence mood and actions associated with strong emotions. Below that is the hypothalamus. Hypo means below, thalamus there, hypothalamus there. As you can see, they kind of separated that hypothalamus into many of its little neuronal pools. There's a blow up of that there. So here, our hypothalamus does many things. It's our main visceral control center. It's going to help regulate our homeostasis there. So one is our autonomic control center. It regulates our autonomic nervous system activity by controlling the activities of centers in the brainstem and also in the spinal cord. So it's going to influence blood pressure, the rate and force of our heartbeat, digestive tract motility, our respiratory rate, and also our respiratory depth. It is also our center for emotional response. So we get perceptions of pleasure and fear and rage and our sex drive. It also interacts with our autonomic nervous system there. It's our body temperature regulation. So it literally houses our thermostat. So it initiates sweating or shivering or other things that we need to do to, stay warm or cool down. It also is going to regulate our food intake. So it gives us feelings of hunger or satiety, the non-hunger. So in response to levels, and this is in response to levels of either glucose or insulin levels in our blood. It also regulates our water balance, body fluids. So it will cause the secretion of a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, which helps us retain water, and it can also initiate the thirst response. It also controls the endocrine system functionings, and it does this by controlling the anterior pituitary gland. So we'll talk more about the anterior pituitary gland in the next chapter. Next is the epithalamus. So the epithalamus is back here. Only want to mention a couple things here. One is a choroid plexus. So there is a choroid plexus there. I know you can't see it on this picture, but that's a cerebral spinal fluid forming structure. All right. Also is a pineal gland, which you do see right there. So the pineal gland secretes a hormone called melatonin. And what melatonin does is it regulates our circadian rhythm, which is our wake-sleep cycle. All right. So when we go to sleep, we start to secrete melatonin, and the melatonin levels increase, and then as we get closer to our end of our sleep cycle, our melatonin levels decrease. Now, I will tell you that light will inhibit melatonin secretion. So you're still getting, even if your eyes are closed, you're still getting light input coming in. And so the earlier that the light comes in, the less melatonin you will secrete. So this is why a lot of people like to sleep in darkened rooms, because that actually decreases the amount of melatonin, or decreases the amount of light, which allows our melatonin levels to remain high. So, you know, this is one thing you might notice if you go camping. You might wake up a little earlier because the sun gets through that tent a little easier. All right, so yeah, let's go ahead and stop there.